Okay.
Ready, Megan?
We good?
Hillary's doing
Okay. Are we good? Okay. All right, we're going to call the meeting to order. Thanks to our AV team. We appreciate you being here. Dynamite audiovisual team. And of course, our trusty and intrepid local reporter, Jen Westendorp. And of course, we have some other guests in the room with us tonight. So we're going to call this meeting to order. It's a quieter meeting, colleagues, unlike some of our more recent meetings. But don't jinx it. So it's council meeting number 38. We're hosting this on Tuesday, July 25th at 6:30 p.m. held in council chambers. And I will be calling the meeting to order. Before I move to approval of the agenda, just a couple of notes. As you may or may not have heard, colleagues, North Grenville has been once again crowned as Ontario's most active community. So this is the second year in a row that North Grenville has won the provincial title as part of Participaction's Community Challenge, which happens every June. And this follows being crowned in 2021 as Canada's most active community on the national scale. But you know, every year the competition gets a little stiffer and a little tougher. And Toronto gave us a run for our money this year. But we got the call from Participaction yesterday morning that on the basis of the quality of our participation and the degree to which we had so many different organizations representing different ages and stages of life, really promoting inclusiveness when it came to the challenge, and really making physical activity less of a barrier, so it doesn't matter if you're 2 or if you're 90, you can still move. They wanted to bestow the crown upon North Grenville once again. So we logged over 6.6 million minutes during the month of June. We had over 1,000 residents who were registered to participate alongside many, many different organizations, including elementary schools, daycares, fitness studios, community organizations such as Seniors Community Services and the Kemptville Youth Center. So we do win $7,500 in prize money, and we'll be having a chat with our Health, Wellness and Fitness Committee that Councillor Doreen O'Sullivan and I sit on about how we make good use of those dollars. As most of you will know in this room, with our $100,000 grand prize in 2021, we chose to invest in some rural parks that were in urgent need of upgrades, and that was in Oxford Station, Oxford Mills, Bishops Mills and Birds Rapids. Last year, with our $7,500, the Health, Wellness and Fitness Committee chose to begin the process of planning for a lending library of sports equipment to lower barriers to participation, so you don't have to go out and buy all the equipment to try a new sport or activity, and the library is just in the process of getting ready to launch that this fall. They bought a special kind of storage facility for all that athletic equipment so that it could be properly organized and managed. And with this year's $7,500, of which we've just gotten the news, we'll have another chat with our advisory committee about how best to proceed. So wonderful news, and I think we're definitely thrilled as a community, and it really is because of the leadership in the community that we secured the title again this year. On another note, we just want to extend heartfelt congratulations to the organizers and volunteers for Kemptville Live. There's amazing acts. I say big acts for a small town. Just wonderful to see the caliber of talent, both global and local, that were on 2 different stages at Kemptville Live. And a special shout out to Karen Bedard, who is the brains and the driver of this festival. So a really wonderful event, and we know it certainly brings a lot of economic development activity to our downtown and generally to the community. So I know that we're as a council eager to work with Kemptville Live for future years, planning to see how we might be able to facilitate the establishment of some additional infrastructure, which could really help grow the festival, give us a little more room to move on the festival grounds. So I think lots of discussions to come. And then finally, I just wanted to say that last night, a number of us joined the International Plowing Match celebration event, and Councillor Doreen O'Sullivan, who chaired the volunteer committee. Perhaps, Councillor O'Sullivan, you want to add a little bit more. But the International Plowing Match that was hosted in Kemptville in 2022 generated $160,000 in profits that were redistributed to the community. So just an amazing, demonstration of the very, very good organizing behind the IPM and their commitment, not just to our community, but the region. This was the IPM for Leeds and Grenville, and Leeds and Grenville was a partner alongside the municipality. So it was a really wonderful room last night. And Councillor Sullivan, I don't know if you'd like to add a little bit more.
Sure, thank you very much. Yes, absolutely. The volunteers were the heart and soul of the IPM. We started getting the idea when we attended Roma in 2019, and we got very enthusiastic about it. And then even with COVID, we kind of got waylaid. But with half the time that normal committees have to organize the IPM, we did it. And with very little experience and half the time that most committees would have. And everyone was a volunteer, from the board, all the chairpersons, all the people, hands on the ground, feet on the ground. It was run by volunteers, and I cannot thank everyone enough for stepping up and doing their part to help make it a success. Thank you.
They also reported that we saw over 67,000 visitors, which certainly exceeded the sort of post-pandemic projections of somewhere between 50 and 60. And there were 2 very tough weather days. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our Public Works team, who were extremely proactive. So under Karen Dunlop's leadership, who sits to my right, I think you just let your Public Works crew go and do what they had to do to make it all happen. So thank you, Karen. I know you played an integral role in certain aspects of IPM, and the rave reviews we got even again yesterday about the commitment and dedication of our Public Works staff was wonderful to hear. So thanks to all of our Public Works staff who made it happen. So with that, I think I've covered all the bases. We'll move on to the adoption of the agenda. But before we do that, colleagues, apologies. Can I invite someone to read our land acknowledgement, please? Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Go ahead.
The municipality of North Grenville acknowledges that the municipality operates on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe. We honor the historic relationship of the Haudenosaunee and the Huron-Wendat peoples to this land. We recognize all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who now call North Grenville their home. We respect and support the need for cultivating a strong relationship with all Indigenous peoples, and we look forward to continuing this conversation and fostering the path towards reconciliation.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So we'll move to approval of the agenda, and that is that the council agenda for July 25th, 2023 be approved as presented. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Wilson, Councillor Sullivan. Any comments or proposed edits for the agenda as presented? Seeing none, then we will move on. And next, I'd like to take this opportunity to invite Joelle Garneau. Ms. Garneau, would you like to come down? Thank you. And as a bit of a preamble for Ms. Garneau's presentation, she had reached out to all of the mayors within the counties. And of course, given that I serve as warden, I thought, I should really call Joelle and better understand her initiative called Kind as a Button. And in talking with Joelle last Friday from the airport in Vancouver, where I was for a few days, I learned that Joelle is in fact fact, from Oxford Station. So she's one of our own, and Ms. Jeannot, our clerk, was very kind to put Joelle on the delegation list for tonight. So we're very pleased to have you, Ms. Garneau. In order for your presentation to be captured, I do need you to turn on the mic. So you can stand or sit, whatever you desire, but we do need you to turn on the mic. Thank you.
Can I move it?
Yeah, I think you can, yeah. If
Okay.
you can move it. Yeah, I think you should be good to
Okay.
go. Well, our AV guys will tell us if the sound isn't audible.
Does
Okay.
my sound okay? A little closer. Okay. If I just talk loud, can everyone hear me? Or should I really use the mic?
The mic is
The
just
mic?
for the purposes of live streaming, because the meeting's
Oh,
being
okay,
live streamed.
perfect.
So you just have to kind of bend down or move it a little bit closer to you.
Okay.
Yep. There you
that
go.
good?
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Sounds good. Welcome.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me, everyone. I really appreciate the chance to come here and talk about my initiative. To start, I want to just give out the posters, and then I have a couple other things I'll give out, but I will need the posters back at the end. So I have French and English. Okay, I work in conference services, so I just wanted to ask, you see the presentation on the screens. Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. So I have started an initiative called Kind as a Button, and I've partnered with the Outpost Cafe and the Sea Road Church in Brockville. And sorry, the Outpost Cafe is in Prescott. I found out that Prescott, the Outpost Cafe in Prescott, had already had a similar button program when I went about a month ago, or I guess a month and a half ago now, and I loved it, and so I decided to team up and to make it bigger and to put it in more than just that one cafe. For next slide, do I just say next slide? Okay, perfect. So the button program aims to ensure people can easily access a drink and a meal every day. So I want to make sure that people in need, who are struggling with money, they still get to go and have a coffee, maybe a water bottle if that's what they need, a drink of any kind, a sandwich, maybe a pastry, a muffin, whatever they need to help them for the day. So that's how the button program started. Next slide. Oh, okay, perfect. So how it works is that the buttons are $1, and that's how people come up and pay. So there'll be 2 baskets at the cash, one for buttons to buy and one for prepaid buttons. So customers come up, they pay for as many as they'd like, and these buttons then get transferred into the prepaid button jar or basket. We're still working on if it's going to be a jar or a basket. And then whoever needs can come up and take out of that jar afterwards to pay for their meal. So I will go ahead and give you guys buttons. Do you want me to just give them to you? Okay. So we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So my goal at the moment is to just get started, kick off. We have obviously the Outpost Cafe who's going to be implementing the buttons. They get delivered to that cafe tomorrow morning. And then they also have a sister cafe that will be opening up in the fall in Smiths Falls, and they will be starting the button program upon opening. And then as well, I have written to 4 different cafes now: Bubba and Bugs, the Brood Awakening, the Sweet Little Bakery in Merrickville, and Little Boat Bakery, I believe it was called. I'm so sorry, I forget the name of it. And that's where I'm starting, as well as I'd like to reach out to some Spencerville cafes. As for medium term, I would love to have at least 1 cafe per municipality, so at least 1 in all 10. And for long term, I'd love to expand past Leeds and Grenville. I'd love to go towards Ottawa and towards Kingston if possible, and really get the button program started on a bigger scale. And then when I was speaking to Nancy this past week, she brought up this amazing idea to work with the Salvation Army and have a more discreet version of the button program for anyone who might not feel comfortable walking up to the cash and taking buttons from there. So we will be reaching out to the Salvation Army to have a second button that will be distributed in the food boxes. So that's a future goal that I have in order to have just a second option that's a bit more discreet. And then long-term, I think I mentioned it, we would be expanding, and then as well with the Salvation Army, I'd love to, if it works out, expand in other regions as well. Next slide. So I wanted to explain the cost to date so far. So I bought an initial package of 1,000 buttons. I was lucky enough that the manufacturer made too many. And so they sent me a few extra bags, which was amazing. And so with some of those extra buttons, I made some pins, which I will give out here. And sorry, you can keep the pins. So that, that initial cost for just the buttons was $489.53. You can go to the next slide. The shipping came to about $20. You can go to the next slide. You could just click them for this one. The posters were, I made 10 English posters and, well, I made all the posters, but I got printed 10 English posters and 8 French posters. So the posters came to $40 approximately, and then I decided to laminate them as I do plan on bringing them to the cafes. And with the food and the liquids and stuff, I wanted to make sure that they were preserved, so I got them laminated. That was another $53, which brings my current total to $602, and that doesn't include the pin backs for the pins I made and the logo design, which I did myself, as well as the poster designs and translation. So that's just I did a lot on my own, and that's fine. It was great. And then, so my anticipated costs, I estimated about another 1,000 buttons, as well as another 1,000 approximately for the Salvation Army buttons, which brings my future cost for buttons to $979. My shipping costs I estimate to be about the same if I just get them delivered all at the same time. So that's about 20. And then I estimated if I was to get into another 10 cafes, that would be about the same for posters and laminations again. So anticipated cost total comes to about $1,092. So that's what I'm looking at for right now for costs. As my conclusion, I also just wanted to add that the Outpost Cafe is its own charitable registered charity. So for anyone who did want to donate more, they could get a charitable receipt back with the Outpost Cafe. In addition, I've had cafes like Bubba and Bugs ask me, well, what if my jar is full? That won't look very good long term if no one's using them. And I told them, well, if it is a concern and they're not being used, they could always donate that money back to the Outpost Cafe and get, if they wanted a charitable receipt, or if not, that's up to them, of course. So that's an option as well. And then what I'm looking for you, and what I'm coming to present a little bit today, is I would love your support, of course, and to help market, get cafes aware, maybe suggest some cafes that would be interested in participating. I'm also looking for a little bit of financial endorsement, just because I am paying out of pocket right now, which again, I don't mind doing. I love the cause, and I'm very excited for it, but it does get to be a lot. And then, of course, lastly, buying the buttons in the cafes. I would love to have you come in and participate in the program once it's up and running. And that's all. So I just have questions and comments now.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your presentation. Colleagues, any questions? So I think my question, Joelle, is to recognize the discretion that some people might appreciate, perhaps even going beyond the button and sort of converting so many buttons into a gift certificate that could be used at a couple of those local coffee shops would sort of ensure sort of that no one is sort of seeing the button, right, as a visible sign that they might need help. But if it was converted through participation with the food banks into a gift certificate, then I think that would even go further to allowing people to sort of have that experience of going into a coffee shop and feeling proud that they can use a gift certificate, because we all get gift certificates or gift cards from time to time. So certainly I think the Salvation Army and the House of Lazarus and some of the other food banks throughout North Grenville might be very excited to hear about your idea. Now, you are representing Leeds and Grenville at this year's Miss World Canada 2023 pageant, is that right?
I am, yes, which is from August 13th to the 19th.
And is this idea part of what you will present at the Miss World's pageant?
It is, yes. So it's my social project. I don't want to say for the pageant, it will be presented at the pageant, yes.
Okay. And what led you to seek the title of Miss Leeds in Grenville for the 2023 pageant? And what's that process like? What do you have to do to secure the title for Leeds in Grenville?
So to get into the pageant, I had to apply first and then go through a second bigger application and then an interview to get into the pageant. And from there, because I live here, I get to represent my community. And for me, community has always been so important. I haven't, grown up here, but I grew up in Elmer, a little town as well in Gatineau, and I've seen how much community relies on each other and how people come together, and especially during the pandemic. I had people help us when we were sick in my own family and bring us groceries. I've seen people, help people get to the hospital, and for me, community has always been so, so, so important, and I even use it at work. I use it within my friends, within my 10-person bubble we had for a while. So being able to represent this community, and I've seen amazing things here as well since I've moved. I mean, I've seen a 100-car lineup at Kemptville, a pay it forward line in the morning, and I've seen just beautiful things that still represent community, and to me that's so, so important, and it warms my heart, and I'm so proud to be able to represent this community.
And that's so exciting, and we thank you for stepping up in that way. What does the competition look like in August? How many people participate? How many candidates are part of this national pageant?
Yes, so 50 women across Canada get chosen to go to the pageant, and we all compete, although we get eliminated. Well, I don't want to say some get eliminated throughout the pageant. The final 5 are winners, and they go to the next international pageant. So there's the Miss Universe pageant, the Miss Supranational, Miss Earth, Miss Globe, and Miss Intercontinental.
Wow. Okay. And how long will you be at the pageant in August? Is it a one-day affair, or is it many days?
It's a week-long.
Oh, wow.
Competition. Every day has a different aspect to it. And what I really love about Miss World, or perhaps it's how far pageants have come over the years, is that it's not just about a pretty girl or having height restrictions anymore or weight restrictions. It's about beauty with a purpose. And so there's more than just strutting on a stage. There's having a social project. There's being able to give a presentation. It's about leadership. It's about being able to pass an interview, and about being humble and being proud of where you're from.
That's awesome. Well, we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
It sounds like it's going to be a whirlwind of a week. Thank you for coming and presenting your project. And I'm sure that we can work together on facilitating some of those introductions for the purpose of spreading the news about this worthy initiative. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And again, you can keep the pins if you'd like.
Thank you. Definitely. Thank you very much. Best of luck. Stay in touch with us. Let us know how it
Absolutely.
goes. Oh, right. We were going to do a photo. So Jen has asked that we do a photo. So we'll follow Jen's instructions in terms of where. Okay. Okay. Thank you once again to Ms. Garneau and her family. We wish you the best of success with your next steps. Colleagues, we're just going to the consent agenda. As you know, items listed on the consent agenda are considered routine and no longer require further discussion. However, it is the right of any council colleague to remove any particular item from the consent agenda. So looking for any amendments to the consent agenda as presented. Seeing none, I'll look for a mover and a seconder, please, for the consent agenda. Councillor Wilson, Councillor Sullivan, thank you. If there are no further comments or questions, then I will call the vote. All in favor, please. Good, thank you. Moving on, we have a couple of reports this evening. So we'll start under corporate services with our 2023 departmental work plan and strategic mid-year update. Ms. Janot, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. So tonight I'm just presenting an update on the strategic plan and work plans. So these were originally presented to council earlier this year, and this is just our first update back to you. So the community strategic plan was adopted in January 2022 after much public consultation. And as I mentioned, we provided an update in April, presenting in line with the budget what staff were planning to do this year with regards to the update to the strat plan. And the strat plan was updated based on priorities from council as well as staff. And then the department work plans all fall in line as well with the strategic plan priorities. Next slide, please. So it's maybe a little hard to see on your screens, but you have the slides as well in your agenda package. So this is what the strategic plan mid-year update looks like in the report. So you can see the first line there is bolded, so that's the strategic pillar. The underlined is the goal, and then the items below that are the key actions. And in the last update column, that's where you'll see the information that staff have put in to provide an update on the item. The next column shows the, sorry, it's really difficult for me to see as well, shows the status and then the progress, and then the expected completion dates after that. Next slide, please. And this is the example of the work plan mid-year update. So you can see in the work plan column, you'll see the work plan that was presented to council originally, and then the last update column is the work that has been completed thus far this year. And then again, you have your status and progress bars. Next slide, please. And I just want to remind council as well as the public that this information is all also on an interactive public dashboard, which can be found at northgrenville.ca/vision. Next slide, please. And this is an example of what you'll see online. So you can see the update in the written description there. And then you can as well, for some of our items, you'll see interactive graphs. Next slide, please. So that's just a quick update, but we are happy to answer any questions as best we can without some directors here about any of the updates in the plan.
Thank you. Any questions, colleagues, before I jump in? Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
It's not a question, it's just a comment on the report card. I think it's a great report card myself personally. I'll note that we're on track on pillars 3, 4, and 5, and that we've actually completed some key action items. For example, the developer's guide, the planning design guidelines that we finished, and the housing strategy under Pillar 1 and under Pillar 2. I'm very proud of the work that we did last term with Councillor O'Sullivan and the Arts and Culture Advisory Committee to get the first arts and culture policy passed, as well as just a recently launched Arts and Culture Development Fund. So those were key actions that we've actually completed. Still early days, there's lots to be done, and it's a living document, I understand, but I think it's a good report card. Thanks.
Ms. Janot, what are you hearing from senior managers in terms of implementation of the various key actions? There's quite a few in here, so I salute you for sort of creating that dashboard, which I think allows for that kind of real-time tracking. It's wonderful to see that level of sophistication, and I know in tandem with your work on the World Council of Data-Driven Cities, or some variation thereof, it allows, I think, for really great data collection. What's if you had to sort of summarize how senior managers and directors are approaching the tracking, do you see any challenges or further opportunities to refine how you're collecting all of the information about the things that are being pursued through the strategic plan?
Through your worship. So I will say that we thank you for the thanks, but a lot of this was made easy by a new software we're using called Invisio. So what you see in the reports also builds out to the dashboard. So it's just really easy to facilitate providing those updates in either format you want. So we're very grateful to have that software. With regards to senior management and data collection and kind of being able to track progress, I'd say it is something that's going to be part of our next step is building out some of those data points. So we collect a ton of data across all of our departments. And one of the next steps, now that staff are a bit more used to the software and putting in their updates, is to build out the analytics that you see both in the dashboard, and then we can also include them in reports.
And as our acting CEO, Ms. Dunlop, do you have any comment on where we sit so far? Of course, the strategic plan was just adopted a year ago, so we're still obviously in the early stages, but there's lots of great information here.
Thank you, Your Worship. With my other hat, under Public Works, I find that it is a good tracking tool. It keeps us on track, but it also shows where our gaps are. In other words, they can be a resource gap, it can just be a workflow gap, it can be something just to give us that little extra push to make sure that we keep things on track. So that's, I do see it as a good tool. I know that Hillary does have to go around and give us a push every once in a while, reminding us to update it, to make sure that we recognize the things that we have completed, and to include that as part of the North Grenville flag in regards to telling what we do right and showing how we're considering the work plan as we do our daily tasks.
And I assume if we have a public dashboard, the sort of back end of it, which reveals perhaps more sort of granularity with each of these items, is every senior manager able to see the whole sort of progress report? Are they able to go into other departments and kind of see what they're doing in case they feel that perhaps they're falling behind and they want to make sure that they're keeping up with their strategic items?
Through your worship, they could if they so wish. It is a little bit tricky to navigate the back end. It's really built so you can focus on your action items, but there is the ability as well for our CAO to create reports with a bit more information, so we can add in those extra options for people to add in more information. That can be a report that's given directly to the CAO and may not be public information.
Great. Well, I know we're just at the beginning. Certainly what struck me is how much work our tourism team has done. There's lots of really good work in there, and it's great that you can kind of see it all in one place and understand where people are making a significant impact. So we appreciate all of the effort that's put into this, and we're very grateful for that software, which seems to make it that much easier. And can I ask, was that software part of the investment through the modernization dollars that we received from the Government of Ontario?
Through your worship, it wasn't part of either the modernization streams, but we did purchase it in 2022.
Okay, excellent. Okay. Anything else, colleagues? Councillor Sullivan?
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor, to Ms. Chenot. I thank you very much for this update. That it's great to see that things are tracking as we go, and it's awesome to see the key indicators for tracking the progress. I just wonder about 1.3, which is promote environmentally conscious development, and 1.3.1 talks about establishing electric vehicle charging stations, etc. But in the development plan, there's a lack of mention or specificity regarding bike racks. If we're trying to promote active transportation and more environmentally friendly means of transportation, that having bicycle parking racks would be something that could be included in this, particularly for the developer's guideline, that is not very specific about the design or location of bike racks. And it does say that it's 100% completed on this developer's guide, and I think that that is missing from that guide, and I'd like to see something a little more specific about the design of bike racks that we should have and the location of bike racks that we should have in North Grenville.
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Dunlop.
If I may, Your Worship. The inclusion of bike racks is also from a site plan perspective under the planning design guidelines. So they are recognized and they will move forward that way as well. So it's just another avenue to make sure that as development proposals come forward, because in the past they were not always considered as much as they are in the forefront today. So I know that there have been some site plans that have not completed the installations, but also some that bike racks were never included in the design. So that is something that's in the forefront as we move forward.
Great, thank you very much.
And I assume we can capture those things as we evolve our understanding of what a good site plan is so that they become part of this tracking. Is that your sense of it, Ms. Jeannot?
Through your worship, I would say for the strategic plan and work plan tracking side of things, and it was to your point about it is a long-term, it's a 10-year plan, so we do need to recognize it's a living document. We can look at including those in there, and we'll flag it for our lovely planning department as well, to maybe make mention of those things as they move forward with providing updates.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, we appreciate this, and we will expect another update at the end of the year. Or is it an annual reporting process to council at this stage?
Through your worship, so our timeline that we plan to implement is the next time you'll see this report is when the budget is going through. So you'll see the work plans being developed along with the budget, as well as updating the strategic plan, the same we did last year to edit some of those key actions that maybe need to evolve over time or maybe be marked as completed and replaced. And then from there, we'll do a report, hopefully each quarter, and of course aligning with the budget for the last quarter.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other hands, I'll just look for a mover and a seconder to receive the report, please. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'll call the vote. All in favor, please. Thank you. That passes. And next, we'll move on. You have a server procurement issue to talk about.
Through your worship, not as fun, but very important. So our server is at the end of its useful life. These typically last 5 to 7 years, and we are nearing the end of year 7 at this point. The replacement of the server will ensure the maintenance and security of the municipality's assets and records, and the cost to replace this server is just over $74,000 plus shipping and HST. And this amount was included in the 2022 budget and carried over for 2023. Next slide, please. So the ask tonight is just to get approval to purchase this server and provide authorization to move ahead.
Great. I'll look for a mover and a seconder then. Thank you, Deputy Mayor, Councillor Wilson. Any questions in regards to the server? Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
I'm just going to make an assumption that the server has a role to play in terms of security of our, like firewalls, that kind of thing. So is this new server going to give us any added protection that you're aware of?
I can't speak to the security per se, but it is adding backup. So currently we only have, I believe, a 2-day backup. So we will now have a 4-day backup. And I will add that as we have moved to a cloud system for our records management, we are seeing a reduction on the kind of, what's the word? Malicious, but not necessarily that, on the dependency on the server itself. So our records kind of have that extra backup because they're off the server itself.
Great. Any other questions? Seeing none, I'm going to call the vote. All in favor? Good, that carries. And next, we'll move on to your last item, Ms. Jeannot. Is that yours?
That was on consent.
Oh, that was on consent. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so then we'll go to planning and development. I'll just note that we have Chief Oakham here. Chief, is there anything you'd like to offer up in terms of emergency and protective services this evening?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll just give you a quick update on 6-month activity in North Grenville for the fire service. It's very quick. Our 6-month statistics are showing North Grenville responding to 230 emergency calls so far this year. That's actually up 38% compared to last year. Of the emergency responses so far in this 6-month period, we've had 12 fire incidents that have incurred fire losses. and our estimated losses to date is $1.6 million in fire losses in North Grenville. And we would like to also announce that we welcome this week Richard Oldham to our department, to our division. Richard is joining us from the floor as a part-time employee since 2001. August 2001, he joined as a volunteer firefighter, came up through the ranks, and is, or I should say was, captain position up until Monday, where he has joined us as our chief training officer for our division. So Richard's going to lead our department in compliance with new provincial legislation for mandatory firefighter certification. And he's also going to continue to serve as a firefighter with the community and provide daytime responses. That is my update, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if council have any.
Thank you, Chief. Just when you speak of that 38% increase, if I heard you correctly, can you attribute that to anything in particular? I know obviously we're getting to be a busier community, so of course I'm sure that's part of it, but is there any other context you'd like to provide for that increase in calls? It's quite a number of calls for a volunteer fire service, so I recognize, and you've certainly communicated, that you're a very busy volunteer fire department. So.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to yourself and council. We can attribute some of the increase for this year storm-related activity due to the ice rain storm that occurred in the spring. There was an increase in elevated calls during that time period. That is not the entire 38%. It is getting busier in North Grenville with the growth, but part of that percentage is in relation to that particular storm. I think it was in April.
And in terms of the acquisition of new equipment, is there any update on that front? And then I'll defer to Councillor Wilson.
And again, through you, purchase orders have been issued for some replacement equipment. I think my last report to council was on our self-contained breathing apparatus. We are expecting delivery of the apparatus very, very soon. We've already had the supplier in for a training with all the volunteers on the new equipment. So when it comes, they're pre-trained. And we're excited to take possession of that and put it into service for the firefighters. So we are expecting that within a couple weeks. We have a new pickup truck on order. Unfortunately, there's delays in manufacturing for vehicles, so we won't be taking possession that as early as we expected, but it is expected later this year. And we do have a few other capital projects that are currently in the works, but we don't have delivery at this time.
Okay. Councillor Wilson, is there anything you wish to add?
Through you, Mayor Peckford, to Chief Oakham. I know you say 38% increase in fire calls over. Are those broken down into actual fire calls, responses to motor vehicle accidents, or medical assistance? What's the ratio? Has there been an increase or decrease?
And through you, Mayor Peckford, to Councillor, I don't have those numbers in front of me this evening, but certainly we do assess our call volume, and we do narrow it down by different type of calls. There is also an increase in medical responses. I can't give you that percentage this evening. I didn't bring the statistical report, but there is an increase in medical call-outs to the fire service. I think part and parcel, that's due to the increased calls that our Leeds and Grenville Paramedic Service are having that we're aware of through the county's paramedic service. That reflects as well on the volunteer or on the fire services within Leeds and Grenville for our call-outs to medical as well. And again, the storm activity is one that has increased significantly, and we expect to continue based on expert information on our environment and how things are changing. We don't expect these calls to lessen in future years, so we're planning for this to continue in future years.
Great. Thank you very much. And then finally, before we let you go, on the recruitment front, how are you doing? I know there's a constant and ongoing effort to recruit volunteers. How are we doing right now in terms of our volunteer complement?
And again, thank you for that question, Madam Mayor. So currently we are trying to get some of our management procedures in place before we go out for a full recruitment. What I can say is, in the last couple of years, we've lost a couple of firefighters due to moving to a new location out of North Grenville or retiring. Before we fill those positions, we want to ensure that we get our full-time position in place, we update our policies, and we implement our new recruitment program, which we hope to have by later this fall, and then we'll start a recruitment program for more volunteer firefighters at that time.
Great. Thank you very much. Seeing no other hands, we'll move on. We don't have Mr. Ogunrende with us this evening, and I think Mr. Guy with Parks and Rec is not here, but maybe, Ms. Dunlop, you could just provide a very brief overview of where things stand at Riverside Park. Not to put you on the spot, but if you could just provide a very short précis of where we're at, that would be most appreciated.
Certainly, Your Worship. So Riverside Park, the expansion and additional facilities that are to be provided at Riverside Park are underway. They are behind schedule. We do have the pool open as of July the 10th with alternative change facilities, showers, etc. We are looking at a late August, September completion of the project in its entirety, and we will keep the public informed in regards to those dates, and hopefully we will be splashing by the end of the year, but if not, we will for the next 30 years. So it is ongoing. We will take a detailed review of the facility with some local media, and we will get some additional messaging out.
Thank you. And of course, one of those facilities, in addition to the splash pad, is the outdoor rink, which I think will be online for this winter. So I think we're all looking forward to that. Okay, thank you. Any other questions in terms of Parks and Rec, colleagues? Okay. I actually am going to take a 5-minute break. I know that Mr. Mosher has 3 very fulsome reports. So if I could ask for your indulgence, we'll take a 5-minute break and come right back. Thanks. Okay, I think we're going to get started again. We have an eagerly anticipated presentation, and I know, Mr. Mosher, you're doing this, I think, in part in Amy's absence. Our Director of Planning was certainly very involved, I think, in the development of the presentation alongside Mr. Mosher. But certainly, it has been Council's interest, and certainly I have a very strong interest in figuring out if we have residents in the community that want to build tiny homes, even though I understand there's an inherent sort of zoning right to build an ADU. There are many other considerations to make it possible. I think here in North Granville, I can tell you as mayor, almost every day I'm taking a tiny home call or receiving an email inquiring, or someone in passing is saying, hey, I think I'd like to build a tiny home. How do I go about that? So we really appreciate that the planning department has put some information together, and hopefully we can kind of make it into a cheat sheet to at least, I think, help people understand what the path is. And incidentally, I've been paying very close attention to the real estate market, like many of us have been, and very unfortunately, it's extremely difficult to break into the market as a new homeowner or as someone looking to perhaps buy a bigger home, or someone wanting to downsize into a smaller home. All those things seem fairly impossible right now in a community like ours, and that's tragic in many respects because it forces people to move, many of whom want to stay here because they've been here for many years or decades, or they want their future to be here. So I'm very hopeful that tiny homes can be something that more residents in North Granville are able to pursue, and I know that this presentation will help certainly orient council and many of our residents to that possibility. So over to you, Mr. Mosher.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm happy to be the team representative for the, quote, lovely planning department tonight. So what is a tiny home? It's a home that is not greater than 37 square meters or 400 square feet. Megan, if you could just please maybe flip through and we'll go, yeah. So under the Ontario Building Code, there are minimum space or size requirements for different kinds of living space. For instance, if you wanted to have just a single bedroom dwelling unit, the bedroom would be required like some sort of a kitchen room, living room, bedroom combo. You could get away with 145 square feet. That's like sort of the law. You'd need to have a 43 square foot bathroom and a 9 square foot of laundry. And again, this would give you, with just a 1 bedroom unit with some shared spaces, 197 square feet. So next one, please. If you wanted to get just a little bit bigger, have a separate bathroom from the living room, dining, kitchen, you can get away with that with 267 square feet. Next slide, please. Again,
to be clear, you're describing tiny homes.
Yes, these
right?
are tiny homes, yes.
The minimum stipulation or the maximum stipulation?
So the building code has minimum requirements for spaces.
Okay.
So if you have a bathroom, for instance, it's got to be at least 43 square feet. That's the requirement. Yeah, you can't have a bathroom that's smaller than that under the Ontario Building Code. So what's the smallest size bathroom, bedroom, living space, bedroom, etc. that you can have that, and then you add up all your square foot together and you come up with a total. So, in this one, for instance, this would be a 2-bedroom dwelling unit. Again, if you used the minimum requirements from the building code, you could construct a 2-bedroom dwelling unit with all of the facilities that you needed under 400 square feet.
And so laundry is in here?
Yep.
So they stipulate a laundry room?
Yes.
It's a mandatory requirement?
Yeah, minimum size of that. Okay. You don't necessarily have to build your home with a laundry room, but if you're trying to build a dwelling that conforms to the building code,
right,
this is the size it needs to achieve.
But is a laundry room optional is my question.
I don't believe that it is for a dwelling, no.
Okay. Whereas in a multi-residential right, building where there are laundry
shared
facilities,
services,
then there's no expectation that there be a laundry room. But
Well,
even in
you
a tiny home, one expects a laundry room. The government of Ontario expects a laundry room.
Yes.
Okay.
Going up again, maybe just to the next slide, please. So We get into the 3-bedroom scenario, and so now with our minimum sizes, we are getting a little bit above it, but you're still kind of in and around that 422 square foot range. So if we go to the next slide. So North Grenville's staff, through partnership with council, has taken some measures to try and remove barriers to the construction of homes, regardless of size. And so in 2021, when there was an amendment to the official plan, and it introduced new policies for additional residential units and stated where they could occur and how there would be a policy framework to allow them. Following that, the zoning bylaw was updated to include provisions for additional residential units on properties, both as a detached additional unit or within a standalone home. Previous to that zone change that occurred, the minimum floor area requirement for principal dwelling was 800 square feet. So obviously that was presenting some barriers to folks if they did want to do a tiny home. If we could go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so this is going again into some of the things that were changed. So with these changes, council paved the way with the official plan, and it also followed with provincial legislative changes through provincial bills. But the net effect of it was that it opened the door for municipalities to allow second units on the properties. So with the zone bylaw changes that occurred in 2022, additional residential units were allowed fully within the basement of an existing home or as an addition, as long as the addition doesn't exceed 50% of the gross floor area of the principal dwelling. And again, as a detached accessory structure, as long as that detached accessory structure doesn't exceed 50% of the gross floor area of the principal dwelling. So if we go to the next slide, please.
Can you just go back, Mr. Mosher?
Yes, please.
I'm curious about the parking. Allows for tandem parking, does not permit a second entrance dedicated to the additional residential unit. So tandem parking is that there are 2 spaces side by side? Is that what tandem parking
No, tandem
represents?
means single file.
Oh, that's what tandem is?
Yeah.
Okay. And why is that stipulation there, and how does it matter in your view?
Yeah, so I think so additional dwelling units themselves, they come in a variety of shapes and forms in a variety of locales. So they may be in the urban town of Kemptville, or they may be in a scattered rural area or whatever. Within town, I believe there's existing zone requirements for driveway widths and how many vehicles you can have, how close your driveway can be to a neighbor's property. So within an in-town setting, it's intended that you're not adding much more driveway space than would be permitted by the zoning bylaw, and instead you're trying to accommodate the tandem. If you have a double wide driveway, you can certainly park extra vehicles there for a second unit, that's fine, but it's if you didn't and you can only do tandem, you're not going to be punished because you can't do a different or more traditional style of parking.
So it's intended to create flexibility?
Yes.
Gotcha.
It
Okay.
is. So I can just continue to go through from my notes. Oh, there we go. Yeah, I think we can go to the next slide, please, Megan. Thank you. So the official plan was changed and the zoning bylaw were changed. And the key points with the zoning bylaw was to say, here's the rules for if you're establishing an additional dwelling unit. Here's the removal of the previous minimum of 800, and let it be the Ontario Building Code that determines how big a dwelling should be. Next slide, please. So these zone standards, they do pave the way to try and remove some barriers that previously existed. The 50% of gross floor area of principal residence, as I understand it, was a sort of a key outcome through the public process by which council considered both the official plan amendments and zoning changes, and it is consistent with other best practices of separate municipalities. The key point being, number one, if you're having a tiny home, it's not going to be that big anyways, but if you're wanting an additional unit, regardless of whether it's a tiny home or not, it's not an intention that it dwarfs or becomes like a second full-sized home on the property. Its intention is that it is secondary, accessory to. So yes, as Ms. Martin has indicated in this final point, an additional residential unit could definitely be a tiny home with the changes that council has made. Next slide, please. It is much easier within an urban serviced context. in some ways because there's piped municipal services, and because additional homes are permitted as of right, they don't need to go through a capacity allocation request or anything like that. They can just get their building permit so long as they comply with all zone standards. Within a rural settlement area or a rural area, it does become a little bit more difficult for tiny homes if an individual, well, primarily those homes are on private well and septic services. So there's limitations in terms of a septic system and the types of dwellings that it can service. So inevitably, it may mean if the existing system wasn't overbuilt or designed for more dwellings or more dwelling spaces, it may need to be upgraded at a cost to the resident, which is a cost that's not realized in an urban context. And then there's minimum separation distances from wells, which sometimes can make it a little bit impractical to do so. I'd say that within urban serviced areas, even with the changes that council has made, the official plan, the zoning, the challenges we sometimes find are that driveway consideration that you mentioned, Your Worship, about, in some instances, somebody might need a second driveway, and it might make sense, and it might be valid, but they have to go through a variance process to obtain that. Or sometimes they may be just over or at lot coverage, and then they might need to go through a variance. So these are some of the realities of trying to do more and trying to remove some of the barriers that exist. Next slide, please. So on behalf of the department and Ms. Martin, I'm happy to have presented this, and I could take any questions. If there's something I can't answer, I'm certainly happy to take that away.
Thank you very much. So look for any hands. Certainly one of, I think, there appears to be a strong appetite among certain residents in rural areas because they have the land, right, to potentially entertain or contemplate a tiny home. Certainly it's not to say that in urban areas they're not also, I think, a consideration. But in those rural areas, which I think we're considering non-serviced land areas, right, really effectively that's what we're talking about, which, obviously within the town of Kemptville, if you will, right, as we understand it, there's on-service land. If someone wants to build a tiny home, I'm noting that one of your slides says additional residential units within an accessory building or structure shall have a minimum lot area of 1 acre and private services. Is that inclusive of all sort of possibilities within or for a rural landowner, or is that provision specific to the additional dwelling unit within an accessory building or structure? Could you help clarify that?
Yeah, so what this is getting at is that, in general, most lots within rural areas, even historic rural settlements, are, in general, 1 acre or greater now. Historically, that may not have been the case. So on a smaller, let's say, half-acre lot, there may be things that preclude that property from having the additional dwelling unit, whether that's the size of the septic system, it's set back to the neighboring well on the other property. I would say that while this is a policy directive, it can provide some limitations, and in certain situations, each one is almost always on a case-by-case basis. We sit down, we meet with folks, and we walk them through the different combinations of what they want to try and accomplish to see if there's a way that they can achieve it. And so we would address these kinds of scenarios. We would sit down and we'd say, is there a way for you to get what you want? And if this is a barrier to a private serviced resident, we would even be able to advise on paths forward or paths that they may choose to try a variance application if they can get a favorable report from a septic designer, from the health unit, that it's something that can work. It's something that can meet those Ontario Building Code minimums. So I'd say it's very nuanced, and yeah, we're proactive. We are very pro this type of a solution. Within North Grenville, we do have stricter rules when it comes to severances in rural areas. So because of that, we often have this as a secondary conversation to those conversations where we say, but have you considered this? So we're starting to put that out there more and more and more as we meet with residents one-on-one. And we're finding that people are very interested in this as a potential solution for how they can achieve something for a loved one.
Thank you. And I will acknowledge Councillor Sullivan, but I just want to be clear in my mind. If say you're on Heard Street with less than an acre, for example, right? So on service land, but you feel that you have enough capacity, right? These are larger lots, to potentially pursue an additional dwelling unit. Does that stipulation of 1 acre apply if your additional dwelling unit is separate from the primary dwelling?
Yes, that policy direction is something that staff would consider when we are looking at how can that application proceed, or
Right.
can it? Yes.
Okay. And the logic to the minimum stipulation of an acre is?
I can't speak to, because I wasn't here in 21 and 22 when it was, all I can think is that in general, it's probably to do with the minimum separation distance from septic systems and wells in those private serviced, dense subdivision type settings.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Sullivan, I think you had a question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to the Deputy Planning Director, Mr. Mosher. So your first slide says, by definition, a tiny home is not more than 400 square feet or less in building area. And then one of the other slides speaks to a 3-bedroom tiny home that is 422 square feet. So, like, could someone build a 3-bedroom tiny home that's a little bigger than this 400 square feet? So that's one question. And the other one is with respect to these minimum sizes, when you speak of perhaps someone wanting a tiny home on maybe their adult children's lot, they may want accessible features. So a 43 square foot bathroom may not be accessible if someone needs a lift or a wheelchair or a walk-in shower, etc. And even a bedroom that's going to allow for perhaps a wheelchair, a walker, wider doorways, etc. So accessible features, can they be taken into account with the square footage of a tiny home?
Thank you for the question. Through you, Your Worship, I think what I'd say is that while the technical definition of a tiny home is less than 400 square feet, it's maybe important for all of us to not get too fixated on that value. Again, it's something that's that's the technical definition, but as this council has done proactively, this council's removed minimum sizes for dwellings, period. So nowhere in North Grenville's zoning bylaw does it say, if you're building a tiny home, it has to be this size or that size or anything like that. And absolutely, if, again, the OBC establishes minimum sizes for dwelling spaces, but they're just the minimums. I would think that with accessible measures being incorporated into design, it just increases it. Again, I think you could still say it's like a tiny home or a smaller dwelling, even if it's just a little over that 400. But the purpose and intent is just to say, in theory, it's possible that these smaller homes can be built and they can meet OBC minimums, whether it's a shared accommodation, a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, or a 3-bedroom that's slightly over the 400 technical definition.
Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Mosher, if someone, as I'm sure they do on many days in North Grenville, says, I really want to explore, can I make this happen, right? I think I may have the right lot, maybe it's rural, maybe it's urban. What are their first steps? What can they expect in the process? Who do they call first? I presume it's the planning department, but what if we had to say, if you're very serious about pursuing this, can you outline the first 3 steps they would be taking?
Absolutely. Yeah, they would give a call to either the building or planning department. Most likely those calls would be funneled to Miss Wood, our planning clerk. And she would say, it's great that you want to consider this as an option. Thanks for reaching out to us. Your next step would be to prepare a sketch showing approximately where you'd want to put your next dwelling. It doesn't have to be professionally done. It's, we're looking for something a little bit more than a napkin, but, just even on a piece of paper that you've hand drawn can give us an idea. and show all the other buildings and structures. Indicate if you're on private services, if you know that information. If not, we can help you to figure that out through looking at the property file if that information's there. And then step 3 would be, if needed, like a meeting with a planner or potentially a building official, just to discuss, okay, yes, you comply with all zone requirements. If that's the case, and we can tell that from the desktop review of the sketch they've prepared, we can say, okay, your next step, step 3, would be to prepare your building permit application. If we see that something's not quite right, it's not going to fit in with some of the zone rules or something along those lines, we can meet in person and just describe what hurdles or obstacles exist and how they would be able to potentially overcome those. So that's the 1, 2, 3 steps.
So a meeting with the planning department is likely in order, right, to be confident in moving forward with perhaps seeking that building permit, right? Because the planning precedes the building in this case.
I wouldn't say a meeting is always necessary. In fact, sometimes that can really slow the process if every individual who's wanting to do it requests a meeting. If the step 2 information they provided is enough for us to say, yeah, that's acceptable through all the rules, proceed to building permit, we can link them up with the building officials at that time. There is a bit of a learning curve for a regular resident, myself included. If I wanted to do this on my home, I would potentially be talking with an architect or a contractor or something. So that process is a little bit outside the advice that we can provide, but we can sort of set the table to say, your proposal will comply with zoning, and if so, here's your next step.
Okay, thank you. Any last questions for Mr. Mosher? Not seeing any. So I'll look for a mover and a seconder for the receipt of the tiny homes report. Thank you, Councillor Sullivan and Deputy Mayor. I'll call the question on that. All in favor? And Mr. Mosher, I know we had talked earlier today, but potentially kind of producing a bit of a cheat sheet, if you will, that could be on our website, right? That could be featured if you're just walking to reception. You never really thought about a tiny home. You didn't think they were allowed in North Grenville. Do you think it would be possible to put some of those critical steps in that context into, sort of a fairly digestible piece of information digitally and by paper that we could distribute?
Thank you for the question, Your Worship. The key phrase that you said is digestible. That's possibly a challenge. There is some information we do provide. It's already prepared from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. Those checklists exist. We could look at those to see if there's a way to maybe provide a North Grenville flavor to it, just to give a bit more specific instruction to individuals looking here.
It certainly seems like it would be helpful because I think there's a perception that maybe I've heard residents say, I didn't think you allowed tiny homes. So they don't even recognize that we're a community that would welcome them. So I think, from that perspective, just providing some baseline information that we are a community that welcomes them, that obviously people like yourself are available should conversations be required, I think would be valuable.
If I may, Your Worship, that's a really important point. For a very long time in Ontario, you couldn't have 2 homes on a property. To have a garden suite, that would have been something, and it was a thing for a loved one. They had to be a family relation. You had to enter into an agreement for 10 years, and then the Planning Act was changed for 20 years. And once that person was deceased, you had to remove the thing. So that was the rules for a very long time, up until like the mid-2010s. And then the rules started to change. So we are still dealing with that very thought, and I didn't think you could have 2 homes on a property. And absolutely you can. Sometimes there's nuances that make it very difficult, but the rules have changed to enable that so that more homes can be built in a quicker fashion.
Well, with that in mind, I think some Made in North Grenville information, I think would be most welcome and hopefully would spur some people on who, have the capacity and the means and the desire to stay in our community. My greatest fear is that we'll lose people, right, who actually either at the front end or the back end, right, of whatever life stage they're at, decide to go elsewhere because the current market doesn't really enable them to stay, either because they can't downsize or alternately they can't break break into the housing market. So I do feel strongly that I think if we had more information, it could stimulate more interest. So hopefully we can, pursue something that gives people that kind of quick orientation to what is possible here. And we have such a fabulous planning staff, and I know how keen you are to respond to questions and, forge, I think, new terrain that, in this respect, I think, the team has such tremendous value in being part of those conversations, particularly among people who don't even know it's possible yet. So I would hope we'd be able to do something. Questions on the table, so I'll call the vote. Or Deputy Mayor, did you want to add something?
Well, just to follow up on the comments that you're making about people not realizing the potential, I think for rural residents, you mentioned, Mr. Mosher, that sometimes severances are difficult to achieve on a rural lot. And so the idea that they could sever part of their property and build a home for a loved one seemed impossible, I think, and people don't realize with the changes to the building code and to the zoning here in North Grenville that an additional dwelling unit on a rural property is possible. Well, you wouldn't have to sever it. So I think that's an important part of it for rural residents to understand.
Yes. Okay. Look forward to more discussion. Thank you, Mr. Mosher. I'll call the vote. I don't see any other hands. All in favor? Good. Thank you. That carries. So we'll move on to your next item, which is the Housing Accelerator Fund. I know this has been an area of substantial work and reflection on the part of yourself and your team, and look forward to what you have to offer in this report.
Thank you, Your Worship. So two recommendations. First, that the report be received for information purposes, and then further that Council endorses by resolution the attached action plan for submission to the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation. Next slide. So the purpose of the Housing Accelerator Fund is to enable more homes to be built faster. North Grenville is an eligible applicant, being a local government within Canada. Some of this is review from the last time it came, but for the benefit of those who may be tuning in for the first time, just to recap. We are considered a large urban jurisdiction, being a population greater than 10,000 as defined by the CMHC application. So being the case, we must define 7 initiatives that we would implement that would achieve the goals, objectives, and initiatives of the Accelerator Fund. The action plan outlines a housing supply growth target and initiatives that North Grenville would take to grow our supply and speed up housing approvals. Next slide, please. At a previous meeting, we were talking about there's been one change. So there's 3 streams of initiatives that are being proposed by staff, and they are broadly speaking within the infrastructure stream, service delivery stream, and then within the stream of partnering with a public-private partnership. So previously there was a thought process in speaking with other colleagues at the municipal office about twinning an outfall from the wastewater treatment plant. We looked at timing of when the wastewater treatment plant would likely, expansion project would be completed. We looked at the cost of that. And for the calculations we began to run when we were thinking of how much money would we be likely to receive from the Housing Accelerator Fund if successful, it became apparent that that was a very costly item, not likely to have all of the costs or even nearly close to all of the costs recovered from funds that would be awarded if we're successful in the Housing Accelerator Fund. So that was removed, and through continued discussions with the Public Works staff, we talked about an alternative, which would be, I think, also in line with the stream of mitigating climate change, and that would be examining the Kemptville College sanitary and storm infrastructure to see where there's inflow and infiltration and connection between the sanitary and storm systems. The Director of Public Works can correct anything I say here, but generally you want to keep your storm and your sanitary separate. On the college lands, them being older infrastructure and the age of the pipes not necessarily always known, it's not, we're not confident that the direct separation is occurring, and with flow monitors that have been placed on certain outfalls at the college, during significant rainfall events, quite a lot of volume of water is being transferred to the wastewater treatment plant. So In speaking with Public Works, they said that if you were to look at that, do a proper analysis and study of this land and come up with a proposal or a plan to separate those streams, there's the potential that you could add an additional 800 to 1,000 residential dwellings capacity to the existing wastewater treatment plant. So that seemed like it was a really great option within the likely costs that would be within the funds that would be provided if successful with the Housing Accelerator Fund. So that was swapped. Other than that, the other initiatives remain largely the same. That would be upgrades to sanitary siphons and trunk sewer mains, upgrades to the Bridge Street pumping station and its force main, undertaking zoning reform, again, just looking at additional ways to reduce barriers to the supply of housing, fast-tracking new commons development, implementing development approval software, and then the creation of additional dwelling unit incentive program. Next slide, please. So that concludes the bulk of the report. I'm happy to answer any specific questions that there might be.
Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you for the report, and this is a very exciting action plan. I think there's a lot of innovative approaches that you've managed to incorporate into it that fits into their guidelines. The action plan identifies that we would be, if we got funding or if this action plan was approved by CMHC, we've identified 302 dwelling units above and beyond what we projected to build or have built over a 3-year period. How does that translate into value in terms of dollars? I mean, they've got $4 billion. How much of that can we possibly get by building 302 extra homes in North Grenville?
Through you, Your Worship. That's a great question. Well, there's $4 billion. Everything that we saw is like, what can we achieve? What's realistic? Yes, we want to be a little bit outside the box, and we want to ask for as much as we think we can reasonably get. But that 302 additional dwelling units above the forecast, based on our existing growth projections, it would be funded. Basically, we would receive 25% of any funds. Like, if successful, if they said, okay, yes, we'll fund you guys based on you trying to achieve that. They understand that there's market forces that may come to bear that may prohibit or preclude us from actually achieving 302 units. But if we were successful as proposed, our rough calculations is that we could potentially receive in the neighborhood of between $8 and $9 million to achieve the Housing Accelerator Fund. With that money, 25% would be awarded in year 1, 25% would be awarded in year 2 and 3, tied to performance, and then the final 25% would be following completion, and again, tied to performance. But again, acknowledging that there's some market forces that we may not have control of. We are preparing projections, and we're trying for something that's 3 years out, and things are subject to change.
Just to follow up, to execute the action plan, to reline the sanitary and water, or at Kentville College, to have a loan program for additional dwelling units, what is our outlay, or what is our commitment in terms of funding? Do you have that number as well?
We do have some rough estimates. So for the Kentville College, for instance, that would be approximately $50,000 to study. Where is the areas that need to be repaired? So that study is, again, it's a ballpark cost. It's what we think it would cost. And then what would we think it would cost to actually realign those sewers or repair as needed? And potentially $1 million to do that one. These are sort of like what we would call Class D estimates, very rough. Given the way that things are fluctuating, we did aim higher with our estimates rather than on the lower side. In fact, we took almost everything that we thought, okay, it'll cost us this much, and we added 40 to 50% on top of that. And then in terms of the additional dwelling unit fund, there would be a cost to that of approximately $300,000 over the 3 years. So if successful, what that would do is establish an interest-free loan, which could be given to people as an incentive to build an additional dwelling unit, and we would be able to fund potentially up to 10 per calendar year. And then at the end of 3 years, as the program would be designed, and if successful, repayment would be had, and then it could be reinvested back into a fund to continue that if the ADU program is popular and But those are the approximate costs for those 2 items.
You speak of the new commons development and accelerating that. So for the purposes of this application, which is a funding application, what is the cost to an accelerated, right, planning process or approval process when it comes to new commons? What does that mean in practical terms?
Great question. It's very difficult to answer. There's no real costs to the municipality. What we know about this is that it is in the downtown core, so that development charges would be waived if the development application is ultimately approved. And then we also know that we can control only the approval process. Any of the costs of construction or delivery of occupancy, that would be up to New Commons in order to deliver that. So there's certain things that are outside of our ability to control those costs.
So is it really staff time, right? Is it because we're not necessarily, the funding we would receive isn't to go directly to New Commons, it's to enable internal processes? Do I have that right?
So if we receive the funding, it will come to North Grenville.
Yes.
To fund these infrastructure things. And I guess the benefit or the offset here is that although it's development charge exempt, the funds from the Housing Accelerator Fund could offset some of those development charges.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So it sort of creates the conditions for North Grenville to continue to benefit from sort of affordable designated housing, because while we forfeit development charges, we would be compensated, if you will, or financially, I guess, recognized for that effort. Gotcha. Okay, that makes more sense to me. Okay. Any other questions, colleagues? I'm not seeing any. Deputy Mayor, do you have anything else?
Not a question, but just a comment. I think of the 7 initiatives, the ones that get me most excited are the zoning reform, where we're addressing some of the older standards that we've been operating under and looking to remove them, and it involves some red tape reduction, that initiative, which will make it easier for people to build as of right downtown and intensify downtown. I was surprised to read in your report that between 2008 and 2021, over those 13 years, there was only 36 rental units built. So that it doesn't surprise us that we've got a real housing problem in terms of the rental market. So zoning reform is something that really caught my attention. Also, it was mentioned earlier, the additional dwelling unit incentive program. The idea that when the loans are repaid, it could be self-sustaining over time, I think is really exciting. And also the other aspect of it that I think is really innovative and attractive in terms, and to the mayor's point earlier about stimulating interest in building additional dwelling units, is the plan to commission 3 blueprints for additional dwelling units, sort of a standard blueprint or 3 of them, and that certainly would reduce the design process, the barrier that people would have. They'll go to the building department, but if they could go to the building department armed with these architectural drawings already, I think it might speed things up. And to the intent of the funding, build additional units faster. I think it's great, and good luck to us. I think it should be a strong application. So I'm looking forward to you getting that in before the deadline.
Mr. Mosher, just quickly, what's the deadline? Sorry, apologies, that's not my question. What is the timeline after the application is submitted? Has the Housing Ministry at the federal level given you any indication?
Our understanding is that they will potentially be awarding in the fall.
In the fall. Okay. And I know certainly I've had many other conversations with other counties and other municipalities who have contemplated and maybe pursuing an application similar to ours. What's your sense of how competitive the landscape is right now for this fund? I know it's a unique fund, first time, so I think it's a new effort by the federal government to, I think, overcome some of those barriers that municipalities are facing. Can you offer any speculation at this point?
I have no frame of reference for the competitiveness of the fund.
Okay. And in your casual conversations with other municipalities, do you understand that many of them are pursuing it?
Within Leeds Grenville, let's say, our understanding is maybe 2 or 3 others are. So,
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
I would say we do have a competitive advantage, I would assume, in the fact that we've done all that work on affordable housing, and we have a housing strategy, which was one of the requirements that to be eligible, we'd have to have that document created from scratch if we didn't already have it. Is that correct?
yes, through you, Your Worship, you get bonus points if you already have it done in the application process.
Great. Okay. So then I'll look for a mover and a seconder to receive the report and endorse by resolution the attached Housing Accelerator Fund action plan for submission to CMHC, which I think I understand is a mandatory part of being able to submit the application. So mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Wilson, Councillor Sullivan, thank you very much. We've had lots of discussion, so I'll just call the vote. All in favor, please. Thank you. And we appreciate all your work. Thank you to you and Ms. Martin. We're very optimistic and know that the caliber of the application is high. So I'll be alerting Minister Clark as well. So he was curious to know whether or not we were going down this path. So I know he's been a champion for affordable housing in North Grenville and the counties up to now. So I'll make sure it's on his radar screen. All right. I think we're going to move on to Lear. Lear, it sounds so ominous, but you can unpack it for us.
Thank you, Your Worship. So Lear, it's a process that we're participating in that's been initiated by the counties, the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville. So in their official plan, they have a line of text which says that within the lifespan of that official plan that they would undertake this analysis to document and understand areas of agricultural potential. So they retained Planscape Inc. in 2022 to undertake this work. So Planscape Inc. is a company based, I think, out of southwestern Ontario, and they're very familiar with this methodology. And it's a methodology that's recognized through the province that examines soil classification as well as local factors and constraints to recommend lands which should be protected for agricultural uses for the future. So once Planscape was retained, the project was commenced in the fall of 2022. As part of that, there was a steering committee which staff from North Grenville were part of. And we understand through our participation with Planscape and the United Counties that it was primarily not yet a boots-on-the-ground exercise. So in order to determine which areas are agriculturally productive, they do a desktop review of soil classification maps, and then they'll look at area factors. So on the soil classification side of things, the Canada Land Inventory says that classes 1, 2, and 3 soils are designated as prime agricultural lands. Just because that's how it's always, like if you had a farm and it had all of that kind of land, but it had been historically fragmented, it may not necessarily be a candidate for agricultural designation. And that's what gets into the area factors. What's happened around it or what things are nearby to it that may preclude or hinder agricultural uses. So following that desktop exercise, draft maps were created in the spring and publicly distributed for comment. And as of this report being presented, Planscape has been undertaking visitation to properties where the owners have requested boots on the ground to review and examine their lands and why they should or should not be included within the agricultural designation. Next slide, please. So this is a map which shows on it in black outline the areas of North Grenville that are existing and designated agriculture within our official plan. The orange areas are shown as those areas that would trigger further investigation and are candidate areas that should be included potentially in a future agricultural designation. Again, just because they are candidate areas from the soil classification layer, it doesn't mean that all of them would be proposed to be included because of that area review factor.
So to be clear, orange is what we've already designated?
No.
The other way?
Correct. Black, the black outline is what is designated by North Grenville's official plan. The orange areas are those areas that are identified as candidate areas for inclusion as in the agricultural designation system.
So there are new areas in there
Yes.
that where we may have residents living, they understand their property to be rural, and this mapping would does it inherently apply in agricultural zoning if the map were to proceed and be validated by the counties?
So a couple things. So this is, I guess, step one in the process, and just because it's been identified, it does not mean that it would ultimately become part of the system. This exercise, it sets the table that future lands could be designated or have a change to designation, potentially from rural to agriculture. So that being the case, this is the step one in that process. The exercise is completed, and there will be a final report, which is not yet done, which makes specific recommendations for individual properties. Once that's concluded, the next step would be an amendment to the county's official plan, and then following that, an amendment to North Grenville's official plan. So before these lands, in whatever capacity or format or configuration they ultimately are recommended, come into some type of a limiting or alternative designation on a property, there's a bit more process to go through first. Next slide, please. So what has staff done? So we've, of course, reviewed that original information. We've participated and attended at a digital fashion information sessions that Planscape has held. We've presented some of this information to the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee, and we've invited them to comment on it. And then we wanted to sort of understand, okay, from an aerial photography view, again, not a boots on the ground view, let's look at what lands in North Grenville are actively farmed and would maybe overlap with the area in orange that's identified as potential for future designation. And we have provided some interim comments to the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville and Planscape, where we are, in a sense, recommending a hybrid approach. Now, that's subject to change. We just wanted to get those comments in an interim fashion as a placeholder for council. And the deadline for comments has come and gone, but we understand that we can certainly get our comments into the process. So if we could go to the next slide, please. This map is a little bit faint, but I've blown it up into sections, and we'll be showing a series of subsequent images here. So we've outlined in black on this map the existing agriculture designation. The very faint yellow that's quite hard to see is the areas that Planscape has identified as those candidate areas. And the areas that are in green are the areas of active agriculture. And then once we prepared this map, it really helped us to sort of see, based on the 2018 aerial photos, what areas were actively being used versus what's being proposed through their recommendation. And so we circled areas in blue on this map of, we think that this warrants further investigation. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So this shows it just in a little bit of better detail, and we see sort of the northwest quadrant of the municipality. I'll draw your attention to the area circled around Monkman Road. So for instance, the black line to the east is the current designation. There's 2 active farms identified in green, and then the yellow shaded area is the Planscape Inc. area where that would overlap. So we circled it as an area for investigation and sent this information off to Planscape. We did the same thing around Scott Road West, around the County Road 25 marker, in and around the Oxford Mills area. Next slide, please. A little bit less out towards the east. A lot of that area has already been designated as agriculture, but we did identify a few other areas. Next slide, please. This is going into kind of that Oxford Mills central area. In and around McFarland Road at County Road 18, we know that there was an area not included as part of Planscape's deliberations because it had been historically classified as muck or organic soils. Early on in the process, they indicated to us that those soils were windowed out because they were likely wetlands. However, we know that that specific area was historically drained and is being actively farmed, so we raised it as a flag for them. Continuing along to the next slide, thank you. Yep, that's perfect. In and around Beach Road, we noted that there's an area of concentration there that doesn't seem to be picked up. Not again as much in South Gore, that seems to be largely protected, but there's a couple bits and pieces here and there. Next slide, please. Into the southwest corner of the municipality, it's the second last image. It just kind of shows in more detail another area of interest was around the County Road 20, 416 interchange with County Road 44 is. Next slide, please. And again, that seems to be the only area of note on this map. If we can go to the next slide. So we have identified these areas of interest and conveyed to Planscape that these likely warranted further investigation. As staff, we would recommend a hybrid approach whereby areas that are in active agriculture and coincide with the Planscape delineation would likely be those which should continue to be proceeding under the candidate land use designation for agriculture. Not every area which meets a minimum score of 60 as identified through Planscape would be recommended for inclusion in their agricultural system, and some areas which aren't necessarily identified in their candidate system may warrant inclusion. And then finally, I did, as a result of going to the Agriculture Affairs Rural Advisory Committee, a member did express her opinion that all lands that are identified as the candidate system by Planscape should be included in North Grenville's final LEAR map. Next slide. So the recommendation today is that Council recommends to United Counties and Planscape to maintain all existing land use designations within North Grenville as they exist today. Further, to add agricultural designations were identified by the LEAR approach outside the current land use designation and where those designations overlap with active agricultural operations with logical rounding out. And further, for a couple of areas where the process did not pick them up, nearby Beulah Road and County Road 18 in McFarland, that even though the approach didn't identify them, that those lands be considered as candidate agricultural lands. So that concludes the report, but I'm happy to answer questions.
I'll go to Deputy Mayor and then I'll put myself on the list.
Okay. Through you, Madam Mayor, to the Deputy Director of Planning, Mr. Mosher. Help me to get some clarification on these three classifications. Well, no, 3 words: classification, designation, and zoning. So just because, correct me if I'm wrong, just because it's classified as prime agricultural land, it's not necessarily designated agricultural? And then how does zoning relate to the designation versus classification? How do those 3 elements, they seem to be used interchangeably, not interchangeably, but I'm finding it difficult to understand their relationship.
Great question. Through you, Your Worship. Yeah, as planners, they all mean very distinct things to us, but to everyday individuals, they may be something that seems to be interchangeable. Classification. So where it's identified as a candidate agricultural area, that's the classification. So it may, once the process is all said and done in the fall, when the report's concluded and they've said, here's our recommended map, it will recommend certain lands. So that's not yet any level of official plan designation. Following the conclusion of the classification of the lands through the report, through the study, the next steps would be official plan amendments at the county level as well as the local level. So if those official plan amendments occurred and the designations were changed as recommended by Planscape, that would mean that those lands are now designated as agriculture, but they're not yet zoned. So the designation is the long-term vision for the property, and the zoning is the use, what you can actually do on it. So following the official plan designations, if that is achieved or implemented as envisioned, the next step would be rezoning of lands. And that would say, if the land was, let's say, rural, it now became agriculture. There's relatively little difference in terms of lands that are zoned agriculture versus rural. The key difference does really lie in that official plan designation.
So just to follow up, if I might, yeah. So I'm thinking of certain lands that might be classified as 2T, T for terrain. They're not necessarily designated agricultural, even though they're classified as class 2, subclass T. So they're not necessarily designated as agricultural, and they'd have to be designated agricultural in order to be zoned agricultural. Great, thank you.
So thank you, Mr. Mosher, and I think the deputy mayor is sort of on a similar track to myself. I'm actually not comfortable with the recommendation that we move forward with some of the desktop mapping, or perhaps for similar reasons or different reasons. If you have a homeowner on a large property that is currently zoned rural, and then through this process, all of a sudden their land is designated agricultural. What is the fate of that property should it be sold? So should the homeowner wish to sell? You noted areas around the 416 interchange, County Road 20, if I'm not mistaken. Those are areas that I understand to be residential. I think they would definitely impact existing residents, and I'm not clear on what happens, with larger tracts of land that are owned by rural property owners for whom they may not even have awareness of this desktop exercise. So I'm concerned about the kind of level of information they might have. In my capacity as warden, I'll tell you that I've been approached by landowners in other parts of the counties who have relayed similar concerns about the fate of their properties should the agricultural designation go through. It's not to say that I don't see value in agricultural designation, but I feel that we need to have more conversation in the community. I can tell you that neighboring municipalities that are very, very agricultural are really struggling right now with what to do with some of this information, particularly given that it's desktop. I very much appreciate the granularity you're trying to provide and that the planning team is trying to provide in terms of the implications here in North Grenville. But I'd like to be a little more cautious and get more information before sort of we accept sort of, on face value where, the external kind of, Lear folks have made some, I think, they've made recommendations that do change how people relate to their land, and that is fundamentally my concern. So just if you could answer that question. You're living on a large tract of land, you bought it, right? It's in a rural zoning, and all of a sudden it receives an ag designation. What happens if somebody wishes to sell?
It's a very good question. From my perspective, which is just mine and not the individual living on the property, but there's relatively little change. If my designation is rural today and my zoning is rural, and it's a large tract of land, and my designation changed to agricultural tomorrow, and then it's zoned agriculture, there's relatively little in terms of use change or any sorts of things at that level. Within North Grenville, I can confidently say that within the rural area, severances are difficult to come by from a policy perspective, primarily because we follow the provincial planning system whereby we have an urban serviced area and settlement areas that are the focus of development first. And at least as of today, that's still the planning hierarchy within the province. So because of that, we have relatively tight rules for severances in rural areas. So I know attending some of these public open houses and hearing some residents can express their concerns and their distress over what that would mean for them. Within North Grenville, there's relatively little difference because of our tight rules for severance regulations around rural properties. And there would be relatively little change to that individual. That doesn't mean that that individual wouldn't perceive it in a different fashion or a way. And again, I'm speaking from my experience if I was that landowner, knowing what I know.
So thank you, and I certainly appreciate that. But so while the person living there experiences relatively little difference, again, if you were to sell, do you have the right to then subsequently sell your home and your property to a future owner with that ag designation? Or would it have to be intended for agricultural use if you're sitting on what was rural and becomes ag designated land?
It's an odd question, Your Worship, to answer, but I think the best way to answer it is anybody can sell the property to anybody else, and there should be no economic implications as a result of the change. I don't know if that helps to answer it.
So with agricultural land, right, some of the things that we're speaking of, maybe additional dwelling units, I don't know what the possibilities are for agricultural land. So if all of a sudden you've gone from sitting on rural land to sitting on agricultural land, and if you were to sell, is it then a limiting factor? Because people obviously understand that your land has a different function, if you will, than that for which it had originally been intended. Is that clear?
Yes. It's actually interesting. So within our zoning bylaw, people on a farm could actually have like a fourth dwelling unit if your land is
Right.
zoned agriculture. So in fact, it's more of like a benefit if you're trying to build more housing for either temporary foreign workers, workers that are working on your farm, loved ones through an additional dwelling unit. So you can build your primary residence, you can build your secondary residence for a farm worker, then you can build your 2 ADUs if you wanted to on land zoned agriculture. That doesn't exist on the rural property today.
Indeed, but the distinctions between severances on ag land versus severances on rural land can be quite different, is my understanding. I think you're saying that North Grenville's very conservative in terms of how it's done severances historically, but we're pursuing this official plan update. We have signals from the province that on the one hand, they want to preserve ag lands, but on the other hand, they want to stimulate rural growth. So I guess I personally, and I say this to my council colleagues, I don't have enough confidence yet in what we're pursuing on our residents' behalf to make a wholesale endorsement of this process, which isn't yours. It's obviously led by the county. So I'd prefer a deferral so that I could, and maybe my council colleagues, would have the benefit of some more conversations with you and potentially with some of the residents who have flagged concerns so that we can, I think, I certainly, and perhaps council colleagues, can better articulate some of the implications, because this remains, to some extent, a desktop exercise. And while there's been one public consultation that was virtual, there is still feedback, as I understand it, coming from the agricultural federations, and there's still a lot of, we're in the middle of this conversation, so to that end, I feel like it's a somewhat premature to just say, we're good to go, thank you, Planscape, for your work, and we'll proceed to the next step. Thank you, Mr. Mosher.
Your Worship, what I'd say then is, so I provided interim comments, so maybe just I'll take the direction from council tonight to, if this is the will of council, I will let the counties and Planscape know what I had said previously. Scratch that.
Right.
If there's something else you want me to say instead, I can do that. Or if it's just that there's more time and you want it deferred at this moment for additional conversation, as you've said, then that's fine too. I'll just indicate one way or another.
Certainly from my perspective, and I'll look to council colleagues, I think to be prudent and responsive to the residents, some of whom, to your point, may be like, hallelujah, I'm on ag land and that's a wonderful thing, but there may be others that in fact feel a bit disoriented by this. I feel like it would be helpful to have a little more public dialogue in the community so that we're well equipped, right, for the conversation. So I don't know, council colleagues, if you have a preference, but my comfort level would be with a deferral at the present time. Deputy Mayor?
I'd be happy to move for deferral because I'm hearing information from you, Madam Mayor, from your experience at the county's table that sort of throw things into question for me. It just raises more questions for me in terms of your concern. So I'd be happy to make that motion to defer this so
Great.
that we could get more information.
Okay. So I'll look for a seconder for the deferral. Okay, Councillor Sullivan, thank you. Okay, great. But it's not to diminish, I think, the good work planning has done. I think you've been very responsive to the process, and we really appreciate that. I think it's just more, as elected officials, we'll be held accountable for some of what's being proposed here, and I don't feel that we're sufficiently equipped yet, so maybe we need a bit of a deeper dive with you at a different time to really understand how many properties would be implicated, right, by a redesignation, and maybe we need our own conversation in North Grenville. I know it's happening in some of our neighboring municipalities as people are coming to terms with what Planscape is proposing. So perhaps that would be of some value here. All right, so the motion is on the table, and I'll recognize Councillor Wilson.
Through you, Mayor Peckford, to
Director Mosher. Is this something that we could bring back to Agricultural and Rural Affairs Advisory Committee for some more comment and a little deeper dive?
Through you, Your Worship. Yes, absolutely. It has been to their
Yeah.
committee twice.
Yeah.
Yes, as you know,
Yeah.
with limited comments.
Do you think it's that they're not understanding the whole?
Oh, I think they understand very well. I just,
Okay.
I don't know. I think it's a very personal, private thing.
Okay.
And that's, I think, all I
Okay,
don't.
thanks.
And certainly, again, I think there are property owners that would welcome that ag designation and see the value in it. And I think there are others that might be a bit disoriented and trying to get their heads around what the next steps are. So I'd be happy to perhaps convene with you after the fact to sort of think about how we can pursue a conversation in the community that might be valuable. So I know, certainly I recognize the province is, I think, trying to do the very good work of protecting ag land that doesn't have that designation or has the potential to serve as agricultural land in the future, and that's very beneficial. But I do think that some of our own residents may be a little bit surprised to learn that their own land, right, their land designation may change, and it would be helpful to at least have a conversation to that end. Okay. So we have a mover and a seconder for a deferral, and if there are no other comments, scanning the room. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, please? Okay, thank you. So I think, Mr. Mosher, that concludes your reports for this evening. Thank you very much. We know you did some heavy lifting, so appreciate all your good work. And I think it's over to you, Ms. Dunlop, Public Works, as the thunder roars above our heads. We have yet to lose power, so.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the purpose of this report is to award the tender to KCE Construction for the installation of approximately 33 meters of 200 millimeter diameter sanitary sewer plus appurtenances on Victoria Street, and authorize the Director of Public Works to execute any agreements. Next slide. The tender was issued on June 23rd and closed on July 11th. 5 bids were received, and KCE Construction, being the lowest priced qualified bid at $86,137 plus taxes. The budget allotment of this project is $103,597. Next slide. The installation of a section of main was identified as a need as part of the investigation into the collapse of the sanitary lateral for 301 Joseph Street. It was determined that the pipe, installed in the 1960s, does not meet current standards and required to be replaced. The pipe material for 6 Victoria also is this old tar paper-based pipe and will be replaced at the same time of the main installation and the lateral replacement for 301 Joseph. Next slide. Notice of construction will be provided to the residents on Victoria Avenue, and notice will be communicated via the municipality's social media. Next slide. That completes my report, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Questions, colleagues? Thank you. Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
So this Orangeburg pipe was used in the 1960s. Is it safe to assume that most of the homes built in Kemptville would be connected using this pipe?
Through you, Your Worship, it was common within the early 1960s within the town of Kemptville that the tar paper impregnated pipe with many different manufacturer names was common in the Blossom, Hilltop, and various older sections of town. Over the years, most of it has been replaced. Some in the 70s with clay, some with other materials, but right now we are using the PVC.
Sorry, just to follow up if I might. So do we have any idea of how much Orangeburg pipe remains in downtown? Do we have any idea? Records of?
Through you, Your Worship,
how
we
much
do
of
not.
it? Yeah, okay.
Okay, excellent. What's the lifespan of the new piping?
75 years.
75 years. Excellent. Well, that's good to hear. All right. Council, you have the recommendation before you. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councilor Wilson? Thank you. Deputy Mayor, thank you. The motion is before you, and if there are no other questions, I'll call the vote. All in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. That carries. And we'll go to the Denison Road Bridge rehabilitation. Ms. Dunlop.
Thank you, Your Worship. The purpose of tonight's report is to recommend the award of project NG 2333 for the rehabilitation of Denison Road Bridge. Next slide.
I think you have it. Do you see yours?
Yep, we're good. The department recommends awarding the tender to Willis Kerr Contracting Limited with a value of $364,193.50 plus taxes, and authorize the Director of Public Works to execute the agreement and all necessary documents. Next slide. Based on the detailed investigations and design completed over the past several years, the municipality released a tender for the rehabilitation of the bridge on Denison Road. During the tendering process, the municipality received 6 submissions, and following the review and evaluation of the submissions, is recommending the project be awarded to Willis Kerr Contracting as lowest bid qualified tender. Here are a couple images of the bridge structure for context. Next slide. The structure is a steel truss bridge located on Denison Road between County Road 18 and Bedell. The municipality has been working with HP Engineering through the design and tendering process, and they will be the contract administrators throughout the project. Next slide. The rehabilitation includes many different facets: remove and replace asphalt and waterproofing decking, partial concrete deck and soffit repairs, partial depth repairs on abutment and wing walls, steel repair of truss members, replacement of joint seals, resurface existing expansion joints, remove existing and install new bridge barrier, remove and replace approach steel beam guide rail, including end treatments, and remove and reinstate asphalt on approaches. Next slide. It is also noted that a fairly significant detour will be in place during the construction project. The project is slated to be completed by October 20th, 2023. Next slide. Notices will be circulated to stakeholders and the public prior to work commencing. Immediately affected residents will also be contacted directly by the contractor and the municipality prior to the works commencing. Next slide. This concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. When's the last time the bridge would have received that sort of work or rehabilitation? Is this the first time, the second time?
Thank you, Your Worship, for the question. I have never known the Denison Road Bridge to have any major rehabilitations in my 27 years here.
Okay, so it's the original structure that we are improving and rehabilitating, is that correct?
That is correct, Your Worship.
And the lifespan for that sort of work is?
Can be anywhere from 35 to 75 years.
Okay. And do you have any idea how old that bridge is?
It is one of our older bridges within North Grenville. It ranks up there between the Limerick Road Bridge as well as the Bishop's Bridge, so it is one of the older structures.
And in the report, it had mentioned it was part of our asset management planning, and to that end, this was well anticipated. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Worship. In accordance with Ontario regulations, we have to inspect all bridges greater than 3 meters on a biannual, so every other year basis, by a structural third-party engineer. And this bridge, so that report is then embedded into our asset management plan by the Treasury Department, which comes up with a financial commitment on a rolling basis. So we're not replacing all 13 structures in 1 year.
Indeed. Well, I think it'll be a most welcome rehabilitation I know it's a well-used bridge and we need it to be safe and endure for many more decades to come. So colleagues, I'll look for a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Wilson, Deputy Mayor, thank you. And this is, as Ms. Dunlop's referred, to authorize the Director of Public Works or their designate to award project NG 2333 in the amount stated to Willis Kerr Contracting, and authorize the Director of Public Works or their designate to execute the agreement and all necessary documents. Any last questions, council colleagues? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Good, thank you. I think we're nearing the end. Many of the remaining items were covered under consent, so I think we're just at other business, and you have one item, Ms. Dunlop.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do have one point of confirmation in regards to the Public Works Department's capital program. So the Public Works Department continues with our capital program of renew, repair, and rebuild. As part of this program, we will complete the sidewalks on George Street, which will link Pine Hill Road and existing sidewalks to Rideau Street. Another project was the extension of our multi-use path system, with the multi-use path to be installed on concession from Prescott Street to the rail trail. During budget deliberations, the actual location was left for future discussion. It is my interpretation that council would prefer the MUP extension along County Road 44 in front of the campus to complete the connection of Prescott Street at Concession Road to the rail trail. I am asking for confirmation from council tonight on this interpretation to change the location of this project to around the corner.
Certainly, that was my recollection. I'll look to colleagues. Are you generally supportive of, I think, a previous discussion and Ms. Dunlop's recollection? Okay, good. I see lots of nodding heads. So I think you have your go-ahead. Thank you for bringing that back for validation. We appreciate it. All right, so I think that concludes other business. Ms. Dunlop, anything else?
I have nothing further, Your Worship.
Okay. Notice of motions, colleagues, any notice of motions? Not seeing any. Introduction and consideration of bylaws, I think we've done that. So we're down to questions. Any questions from members of the public or our trustee media? Ms. Westendorp? All right. Then we'll move to close of the meeting. And that is that bylaw 7312 to confirm proceedings of council and its meeting held on July 25th be adopted and passed. Mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Wilson, Councillor Sullivan, thank you very much. I'll call the question. All in favor? And a motion to adjourn at 8:45 p.m. I'll look to Deputy Mayor, Councillor Wilson. Can you move in second, please? I'll call the question. Non-debatable. All in favor? Raise our hands. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.